Welcome back to Big Talks, because we hate small talk. This is Sauda and Musa, and today we're back at it again with another episode.
Hey guys, so today we're going to continue off from where we ended last time, which is about inviting people to Islam. And when I think about inviting people to Islam, I think of a really common story in my life and Musa's life, of course. But before I get into the story, I want to give a little backstory to the story. So basically, me and Musa have been married for 4 years, almost, right? And before we were married, probably a very short time before we were married, was when he came to Islam, right? Or he came to know about Islam. So now to put this in perspective, let's think of a conversation that I've had so many times, right? Which is, hey, people get to learn to know that I'm married. And they're like, hey, how long have you been married for? And I say, oh, I've been married for 4 years. And then they're like, wow, that's so cool. You've been married for 4 years. And then as the conversation goes on, they get to learn about Musa. And they're like, they look at him and he's black, or he looks black and mixed or whatever. And I look like what you would stereotypically think of when you see a Muslim. So they're like, was he like born Muslim, or was he Muslim before he met you? Because people, whether you're a Muslim or you're a non-Muslim, it's not expected, right? I mean, now you kind of look like a Muslim with a big beard and stuff, but it's not really expected that your name is Jeremy and you are a Muslim. Mm-hmm. So they'd be like, was he always a Muslim? And I'd respond saying, no, he wasn't always a Muslim. He came to Islam, right? And then they'd be like, oh, wow, that's so amazing. And there's usually two responses that I'll get in this moment. One is, when did he come to Islam? And I'll say, 4 years ago. And they're like, oh, okay. Which leads to the second response that I'll normally get. Sometimes this one comes right away, which is, oh my God, so he converted for you? That's so sweet. That's the sweetest thing ever. And I'm probably really loud on this mic right now. Let me lower my voice. But, yeah, and immediately I'll think to myself, and I've been through this so many times, and I'll think to myself, just because I said 4 years ago, or whether it was 1 month or 2 months or however soon it was before the nikah, which is the marriage contract in Islam, that doesn't mean that he converted for me, right? And so the reason why I wanted to bring up this little story, guys, is because when we think about the act of calling someone to Islam, it can be done in so many different ways, right? And so I'm just going to hand it over to you, and you can give whatever feedback you have on that before I move on to the next thing.
Okay. Well, we'll come out with the obvious thing that needs to be said. I didn't convert for my wife. Plain and simple, right? So just to give some backstory to that, when I learned about Islam, I was in contact with my wife. She was the one that introduced me to Islam, but it's not like I converted because I wanted to marry her, What happened was, I'm actually very skeptical about these things. I was originally, a long time ago, atheist. After some time, I realized, why am I atheist? I don't have a reason for being atheist. So it makes more sense to have a reason behind doing things. So I reeled back from being atheist. I didn't have any objective reason against God's existence. Therefore, I just took the agnostic stance. Look, I don't know if he exists or not. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. I don't have enough information, so I'll just leave it unknown, right? I won't make an opinion or make a judgment on it. So after taking that stance, sometime after that was when my wife showed me what Islam was, taught me about it, told me what was going on, gave me information related to it. I went to the masjid for the first time to kind of see what was going on. Prior to that, I had already started doing some research, because not having a position wasn't a stance that I kind of wanted to be in. Mm-hmm. I'm not the type who likes to not know. I'm the type that wants to know really bad. So I started doing research, looked into Christianity for a bit. Christianity had so many contradictions within it that I couldn't trust it, though I did find truths in Christianity. So because I found those truths, I looked at it as like a possible good historical record. So a lot of my foundational understandings kind of came from the truths that I can pull from Christianity. But there is so many contradictions, especially when you compare it to actual history,
Right.
that I couldn't take it on, right? So time went on. My current wife, of course, my wife, she...
Current wife, okay.
Wife. I don't mean anything like that. My wife, she introduced me into Islam. I didn't even know that it was really a thing. I had some knowledge on it. Like, it's not like I didn't know Islam. I've never heard of it before, right? I'd heard of Islam before. I just never actively decided to do anything with the information or look into it or had a desire to look into it.
Right.
So I looked into it, started diving into the information, and what I found when I dived into the information was it made sense of everything, right? There's weird facts that I always had in the back of my brain, like take for instance, like when you look at Egypt, the ancient Egyptians, the fact that they built these pyramids and they're so well designed, and like the knowledge that they seem to have in the past outweighs the knowledge we have now, because these things were built to mathematical precision. We can't even replicate this today. It's like, well, if they had more knowledge back then, how and why and what, this doesn't make any sense to me.
Right.
We should have progressed up until the point that we are not regressed.
Right.
Well, religion isn't typically where you would look to get this answer. However, coming to Islam, what I learned was that Adam, the first human, was given the knowledge of everything.
Right.
Which gave me a starting point for knowledge, right? Knowledge in the absolute, the highest point of knowledge for the human being was with Adam.
Right.
And then over time it regressed, which made sense with what I was saying, right? That's just one example. There's many more examples tied in there, but I don't want to take too much time talking about that. Point is, information that Islam had to offer made sense to me. And it made sense of questions that I had, objective questions that I had, and it gave me objective reasons for these things, right? So now it was a matter of, okay, here goes all this information that seems to make sense of everything that I'm saying, everything that I want to know, all these questions that I have. What do I do with it?
Right.
Right? This is a religious book. It's either true or it's not true. Is it true? I had reason to believe, and always have reason to believe, and currently still believe it's 100% truth. Right? As I looked through it, as I analyzed it, as I critiqued it, it proved itself to be true. Therefore, I had to make a decision. Okay, it makes itself, it proves itself to be true. Now what do I do with that? So the only thing that made sense to me was, this makes sense. It looks like it's true. I believe, I trust this information. The only thing to do now is to convert.
Exactly. And for those of you who are a little bit more interested in the storytelling novella type of stuff, there wasn't telenovela. There wasn't a whole bunch of emotion and I really want to marry this woman, so I'm going to just falsely claim something that I don't believe.
Right.
And I want to just highlight the implications that come with those kinds of statements. And this is not to target anyone or to accuse anyone of any type of like bad thinking. But I do think that we all should have an awareness when we say these kinds of things. For example, right, there's an underlying implication that exists when we openly declare that someone wants someone to come to Islam just to marry them. In other words, we're declaring, or the connotation behind that is that I'm okay with Musa being a hypocrite just so that I can marry him. That's an implication there that's not openly stated. However, it is something that we need to be careful about and consider before we make those kinds of claims. There's another implication, which is a person can just come to Islam just like that, without actually believing, without having any knowledge, just because they want to marry someone. And that implication in and of itself is not something that's really beneficial to that person. It's not something that actually, and this is also probably going to be a bold claim, but it doesn't make them a Muslim.
Right. No, I agree.
So basically, taking the Shahada, or saying the Shahada, I should say, does not make someone a Muslim.
Right. Actually, knowledge has to precede the Shahada.
Right.
Right. So before you even take the Shahada, you can't just say Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah and not know what you're saying and be considered a Muslim.
Right.
So to some extent, or to most extent, you have to know what it is that you're saying and actually be committed to it. Mm-hmm. And honestly, the fruit is in, like, the tree will bear fruit.
Right.
Right. The Shahada, the tree will bear fruit. If you're somebody who comes into Islam saying the Shahada and you are not being truthful, you're not being fruitful in what you're saying,
right,
there will be no fruit. So you'll end up, you might end up seeing Muslims who come in, don't pray, but they literally got married and took the Shahada literally for the marriage. So
right,
they don't apply the religion at all.
Yeah.
Then you have those who actually take the Shahada, and the first thing they do is they try and learn how to pray.
Exactly.
First thing they do is they try and learn what's going on in the Quran. You know, you can see the evidence, you can see the fruit from the tree, and that'll tell you whether the tree is good or not.
Yeah.
You know, and it's the same thing. You'll know if that Shahada was real. You'll know if that declaration to the faith, that conversion was real, based on the fruit.
Right. And I mean, that is absolutely true. And and the thought that I had was that to say, well, oh my God, he converted for you, that's so sweet, you know, he converted for you is the problem, right? In that statement, for you is the problem, because you cannot convert or take Islam as your way of life for someone else. That does not qualify as taking Islam. Right. Okay. So those are the two implications that I wanted to mention under that. And then when it comes to the whole telenovela stuff, which I didn't mention before, so it was kind of like this. It was like we were in college, and so we actually met a really long time ago, but we re-met for like a little over 4 years ago. And at the time, so Musa at the time, Jeremy, right, when we re-met, it was like, oh, hey, yeah, you know, I know you. We used to know each other really well, especially when we were younger and in classes together and stuff like that. And there was seemingly, obviously, an interest that existed between both of us. Right. More so from you to me, really. And considering at the stage that I was in life, I was already divorced. I was already strong in my deen, and I was certain about what it was that I wanted from my life. I invited you to Islam, right? And it wasn't necessarily like, hey, I want you to convert so that we could somehow marry each other and all that. It wasn't like this juicy kind of thing that people imagine happened. It was more like, look, you're an individual that I care about, and I'm calling you to Allah. Learn about Islam, and if you choose to take it as your truth or not, that is irrelevant to what happens between us. In other words, it wasn't like hey, we really like each other and we want to get married, so you need to just, you know, convert and become Muslim or anything like that. It was more like, you've crossed paths with me twice already, and I don't think that you're crossing paths with me twice for no reason. So here is the deen of Allah, take it or leave it, right? And then what came after that was based on what ended up happening. And the interesting thing is, when Musa started studying Islam and he started adding all these pieces together, like he's explaining to you guys, I didn't actually know a lot of that was happening. And actually, I remember being at the masjid one night and just hearing our sheikh come on the speaker.
We have a new shahada.
And saying that someone's going to take the shahada. So I was really interested. And then, mind you, he meant that, here's some juicy stuff if you want it. He mentioned that there was going to be a woman on the woman's side also taking a shahada, right? So all the women now got really excited. So they put on the TV and they're looking at the screen. And then, lo and behold, I see Jeremy standing there. And I'm like, whoa, why is Jeremy standing there, about to take his shahada? And I didn't really know what was going on. So anyway, you took your shahada. It's on Facebook. And it's so funny because after you took your shahada, then he mentioned that they're going to go ahead and give the shahada to the lady. So all the women on the women's side were looking for this woman, and they couldn't find her anywhere because she actually had left early for some reason. I don't know, I guess she changed her mind. I'm not sure. But it's so funny because in that moment they were like, oh my God, there's a woman here too who's going to take her shahada. Oh my God, maybe they're both going to get married. And I just remember blurting out, no, they're not. And then I was thinking to myself, like, oh no, why am I blurting out, no, they're not? And to top it off, how would I even know if that was actually the case or not? But it's like, I knew that I didn't want that to be the case, obviously, right? I mean, clearly I knew, or I don't want to say knew, but like 99% that's not what was happening.
Right. You
get me? But yeah, that was just a really funny part of that story that ended up happening. So then, after you came to Islam, we did end up getting married after that, and things kind of just went from there, right? So guys, the reason why I wanted to bring up this story in relation to calling people to Islam is because a lot of the time when people hear this about our story and they think of it from this really romanticized kind of perspective, and they put in all of these emotions into it, and they put in the worldly aspect of it, the worldly aspect of, oh my God, he just probably loved her so much and that's why he falsely took Allah as his God, and now they're happily ever after married. And I'm like, whoa, stop. Just pause right there. As we've mentioned, that's not what happened. But there is one more point that's so important, and it's so unrecognized, which is the virtue of calling someone to Allah. Right. Regardless of how it's done, regardless of whether it's done in the case of you have two people who are interested in each other, one is a Muslim and the other one says, here, why don't you learn about Islam? And they really want them to come to the deen. This has nothing to do with marriage or not, okay? Or you have people in a workplace, or you have people in a school, or you have, as long as you're on equal grounding, because if you do it on a Just a side note, I don't know if this is going to be important information to anyone, but legally, if you do something like this in a place that you're not equal with someone, legal action could be taken against you. For example, a therapist to a client, or a teacher to a student, right. Or even an employer to an employee. If you are propagating your belief on those levels, just be careful, because legally it's not allowed, right? But let's say it's two coworkers, two students, two people who just know each other, or two psychologists, two therapists, something like that. It's totally different,
right?
Okay. So the reason why I wanted to bring up this is because there's so much virtue in it, and I actually want to go ahead and read a hadith. But before I read the hadith, for those of you who are not Muslim, Musa, can you just go ahead and explain really quickly what hadith is?
Okay, so Hadith is, in short, like maybe an easy way to understand it, it's the sayings and teachings of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace and blessings be upon him. Basically, in Islam, there's two. You can look at it this way. There's two forms of revelation, right? There's the Quran itself, which is revelation, but the Quran itself openly states that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam does not speak of his own word. What he speaks is revelation, right? So the Quran equates the Prophet's speech, what he does, because he doesn't say anything of his own self, as revelation, right? So we have the Quran and then we have the Hadith, right? The Hadith is the efforts made by the companions of the Prophet to record that revelation. So they did an oral tradition, things were spoken, so they would hear the Prophet say something, then they would tell somebody else, and they would tell somebody else, and of course, because of the weight of what he's saying, people would go ahead and take it as revelation, right?
Right.
Now, over time, that chain of narration got to a point where people can actually write it down. So what we have now is the written form of those teachings, right? So the Prophet said this, the Prophet did this, all of that, the sayings and teachings is what we refer to when we say hadith. Right.
All right. Thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and read a hadith. So it states, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, said, whoever calls others to guidance will have a reward like the rewards of those who follow him, without that detracting from their reward in any way. And whoever calls others to misguidance will have a burden of sin like the burden of those who follow him, without that detracting from their burden in any way. Okay? Right. So, interestingly enough, what it's stating is this, guys. Regardless of how someone is brought to Islam, the reward in that is just huge. Because when you bring someone to Islam, for example, throughout our entire story, regardless of whether someone wants to take it from this very dramatic emotional stance or whether they want to take it from how it actually happened, is that there is so much reward in bringing someone to Islam, and not only that, but you also get reward from or of those rewards of that person that you brought to Islam, without taking away from the reward that they get.
Right. In a sense, like when it's saying whoever calls others to guidance will have a reward like the reward of those who follow him, the idea is that you've called someone to Islam, and now that they are Muslim, they're going to be gaining rewards, right? So they're going to pray, they're going to fast, they're going to do all the general things that a Muslim does. Right. Right. Now, because the person who called that person to Islam is involved, they're the ones, like the starting point for this person becoming Muslim. Right. The reward for that person who brought them to Islam is that they're going to also gain rewards
without taking away
good deeds for the good deeds that person performs from that point on. Right. Right. So if I pray, my wife gets rewards for it. If I fast, my wife gets rewards for it. And there's no deficiency in the reward either. So it doesn't take away from my reward. I get it, she gets it as well. And that's kind of how it works. I think another thing that's important to kind of keep in mind is that it's not like it's a direct thing. Like, it's not like I did something, I get this reward, and you get the exact same reward. Right. You're getting a reward equal to that. It's like that reward. Right. So it's not, oh, there's a one reward, I prayed, there's one reward, I get it, she gets it. It's, I get a reward, she gets a reward. Right. And the same thing goes in the opposite, right? So for those who call to misguidance, they will have a burden of sin like the burden of those who follow him. And this is kind of why I wanted to talk on this really quick. It's not like I misguided you, I get a sin for that, and you get the same sin. It's I get a sin, and you get a sin equal to that sin. Right. So they're two different, they're going on a different scale. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because of the concept that people have of original sin. Right. Islam does not have this concept of original sin. You can't inherit the sin of somebody else, nor is this evidence of gaining the same sin, right? This is gaining a sin equal to that, but for your own reasons. Right. Like a deed would have had to been
done. Exactly.
Right. So we don't just inherit the sin, or you don't just inherit the sin of somebody else just solely on the basis of like lineage.
Exactly.
Right. It's you did a sin, you misguided this person. Therefore, because they followed that guidance, every time they sin, because you're the root of that, you're going to gain a sin equal to that of theirs.
Exactly.
Not, I'm getting the same sin.
But they had to have done something.
Right.
And I think that is something that, really good point. It needs to be brought up. It's totally different from the concept of original sin.
Right.
Based purely on the fact that you had to do it yourself too.
Right.
So, think about it like this, right? A lot of the time, when I tell people that Musa is a Muslim, those who don't know him and know how much he has invested into this and studied and put so much time and effort and energy into learning about Islam, those who don't know all of that, right? Those who know me and they don't really know him, or even if they don't know me, they just don't know him. That's the factor, right? There's always like this little connotation or this like background thought that he's not truly invested in the deen and that it's just because of me. And so, or I don't care if he's truly invested in the deen or not. It's just, I just wanted to be with him. And what I want to say to all the people that undermine and think of it in terms of just doing it for the sake of love, right? Let's say, for argument's sake, it really was for the sake of love, right? Let's just say I really truly did love Musa and I wanted to be with Musa, right? Mind you, I'm not saying I didn't care at the time, but it wasn't that much romanticized. But let's say for argument's sake that it was super romanticized, and it was like we're so madly in love and we can't imagine being without each other, and all of that, right? And let's say that from that, Musa learned about Islam, truly believed it, and came to Islam. Does that take away or does that negate what Allah tells us that you gain from this happening?
Right.
It does not. It absolutely does not. And so I just want to say to the people that underestimate these kinds of situations, because they do happen with a lot of people. It may not necessarily be our specific case. It could happen with other couples. It could happen with them themselves, and they don't really see the virtue in something like this happening. And this is the doorway, this is the pathway that Allah opened, and as long as you do what is pleasing to Him, it doesn't make it an invalid passage.
Right. You know, it really highlights the love that Allah has for His slaves.
Mm-hmm.
Because as Muslims, basically you can live your entire life not being a Muslim, right? You're Muslim, you may believe it, but let's say you don't do the deeds, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's say you've lived a life that is just really bad. You fell in love with some guy and you brought him, or fell in love with a girl and brought them to Islam. This hadith applies. Mm-hmm. So you could continue to live your life and not really be a Muslim, but if that person decides to change their ways, they became a Muslim, they actually decided to take on the deen, like say halfway through the marriage, and started praying and doing all these things, you get that reward.
Right.
It helps you tip the scale, and that's a special blessing that Allah gave, a special mercy Allah gave to that person, even though this person didn't even really do anything, even though they weren't being a Muslim in the sense of what being a Muslim means, right? Because a Muslim is somebody who submits themselves to God.
Right.
It's an action,
right?
Even though you're not a Muslim in the literal sense, where you're not submitting yourself to God, you're worshiping other things, or just you have the belief but you just don't do anything. Allah has still given you a special mercy, in the sense that He's given you this reward. Mm-hmm. You brought this person to Islam. Therefore, any good that this person does for the sake of Allah, you get an equal reward to that, right? And you never know what that's going to do for you on the Day of Judgment. That could literally be what tips the scale in your favor, because you might die, you might pass away, and that person continues to be a good Muslim. And just to give you guys a real understanding of how far this goes, if, let's say we have a Muslim, didn't practice, married somebody, brought them to Islam, right? And they die. So they die, maybe on the Day of Judgment, they don't have much on their scale. The person they brought to Islam becomes someone who calls people to Islam. So they go, they practice, and they call others to Islam. And let's say they call 50 people to Islam. All 50 of those people become practicing Muslims. That person who called them to Islam is obviously gaining the rewards of those 50 people for every action that they do that is pleasing to God.
Right.
But what about the person who brought him?
Yeah.
Is that person not still gaining rewards? Of course they are. For every reward that they get, you get an equal reward to that. And that's just to give you a real weight and understanding of how important calling people to truth really is.
Right.
That's the rewards behind it. So why would you not want to do it?
Exactly. I mean, how crazy is that, right? In a good way. Like, how merciful is Allah that these are the opportunities that He gives us.
Right.
And so yeah, don't underestimate your situation. Don't, if you are in a situation like the one that I've described, and you're interested in getting married to someone, or someone has crossed your paths and your path, and you feel like you may care about this person in some way or the other. It doesn't have to be a romantic situation, but even if it is, right? Take the opportunity. You never know how Allah would reward you. Don't think, well, I'm a bad Muslim. I don't wear hijab. I don't pray every salah. You know, sometimes in Ramadan I just feel hungry, so I don't really, fast the whole day. But nobody knows that. Don't underestimate what could come from truly investing in and inviting someone to Allah. Just don't underestimate it, and don't try not to look at it through the wrong lens.
Right. And just another thought experiment really quickly. So now that we've kind of explained and given an idea of the virtue of calling people to Islam, imagine the reward for the Prophet. Right? So here we know that the events trickle down. We know that everything goes from, okay, this person does a reward, I'll get it. And this goes back. But who was the first of Islam to do this? The first of Islam to do this was the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So imagine the rewards he's getting, and imagine the special privilege and the status of the Prophet Muhammad that Allah gave him to give him the opportunity to do that.
Right.
And then look at what he actually did with it.
Right.
He was the first of the Muslims to be calling people to Islam.
Right.
And his reward is increased with all of our rewards. And then we wonder why the Muslims look at him as the greatest of humanity.
Right.
Even even on the scales on the Day of Judgment, you can see the difference in weight. So that's just something to kind of think about,
Yeah.
For the Muslim and the non-Muslim.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So, anyway, when I think about this whole story with Musa, I would correct the person and state that, no, my husband did not convert for me. He converted for the sake of Allah because I introduced it to him. And that is just one of the most virtuous deeds that we could ever do. If you care about someone, if you love them, if you're interested in them, if you just feel like you have the responsibility, which you do, just keep thinking about it, keep putting things into perspective. I hope that this story kind of sheds some light on this very common situation that occurs when one person converts slightly right before a marriage or something of that nature, or maybe even after a marriage has already happened, such as in the case of a wife converting afterwards, and things like that. I just hope that it sheds some real perspective on those kinds of scenarios and the actual mercy and reward that Allah has promised, the virtue in it, and again, just what makes it so worth doing. And that's the reason why I wanted to go ahead and lead with this very relatable story and this really relatable event that continuously happens so long as someone knows that it exists. So, yeah. Okay, so anyway, guys, I really hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that you learned something. And thanks for listening.
Thank you for tuning into Big Talks, because we hate small talk.